The majority of European countries and Canada will continue to support Ukraine against the backdrop of the changing U.S. policy, the President of France, Emmanuel Macron, said following the informal summit in Paris. The meeting of European leaders on February 19th, the second in a week, was devoted to the security of Ukraine and Europe. The previous one took place on February 17th, the day after the end of the Munich Security Conference.
We stand with Ukraine and will take full responsibility to ensure peace and security in Europe. This is the fundamental interest of France, and I am its guarantor, Emmanuel Macron, President of France, on X social network.
The President of France also noted the main, according to Kyiv's partners, principles of peaceful settlement. First, Ukraine must take an active part in the peace processes, and its rights must be not violated. Second, the peace must be long-lasting and accompanied by reliable security guarantees.
The third thing he said is very important, that when discussing a ceasefire or a peace plan, Europe's interests should be taken into account. It seems to me that Europe should make its interest clearer here and further defend this interest in its proposals. Because we see the logic of the United States. This is primarily a business approach. We see the logic of Russia. We see China, which is sitting and waiting. Therefore, Europe should indicate its interest here.
Emmanuel Macron is planning to fly to the United States in the coming days. French Secretary of State for European Affairs Benjamin Haddad has said that Europe has a number of trump cards to play in potential negotiations. The official named as leverage the amount of support for Ukraine, which he claims is more than from the United States, economic pressure on Russia, and the EU's ability to provide Kyiv with reliable security guarantees.
Macron has been showing such initiative for a long time, with a view to preventing certain problems, being bolder in certain initiatives, first of all, in the field of security. France is a nuclear state, as is United Kingdom, so these two countries and their leaders can talk about security and propose bolder solutions.
Prime Minister of United Kingdom Keir Starmer is also preparing to visit Washington. According to The Telegraph, he will call on the President of US, Donald Trump, to keep American fighters and missiles in Europe on standby in case Russia violates the terms of any potential peace. In addition, Starmer is likely to bring to the United States the strategy of deploying European troops in Ukraine.
Sir Keir Starmer will present Donald Trump with a plan to send fewer than 30,000 European troops to Ukraine in an attempt to secure American protection for the deployment. The Prime Minister is expected to detail how European forces could police any ceasefire deal brokered by the U.S. President when the pair meet in Washington next week. From the Telegraph publication,
the President of Lithuania, Gitanas Nausėda, also announced his plan to support Ukraine. In his opinion, Ukraine's membership in NATO cannot be removed from the agenda. The Russian Federation must be held accountable for war crimes, and sanctions must remain in peace until Russia's war against Ukraine ends. Nausėda called for the seizure of frozen assets of the aggressor country, the introduction of tariffs on Russian and Belarusian imports, and the accelerated integration of Ukraine into the European Union. Reported by Alexandra Zaslavets, Valeria Nikipelova, UATV News.
Europe must show no weakness towards Russia. The future defense spending quota of NATO countries will be much higher than 2% of gross domestic product, Alliance Chief Mark Rutte said. He supported Donald Trump's position on the need to increase military investment in the bloc's countries. In particular, Rutte believes Germany should spend more and produce more, and that will be the subject of debate in many European countries in the coming months.
Trump was generally right with this demand during his last term as president. And thanks to that demand, we have invested more, but we need to invest even more. And in the coming months, allies will decide exactly how we will measure that. But I can assure you of one thing. It will be much more than 2%. Mark Rutte, NATO Secretary General, in an interview with Bild.
After his inauguration, U.S. President Donald Trump said he plans to ask NATO to spend 5% of gross domestic product on defense instead of the current 2%. In 2024, 24 out of 31 NATO countries spent at least 2% of their gross domestic product on defense. Some states, such as the Baltic states and Poland, supported Trump's demand. Others, such as Germany, called 5% of gross domestic product unreachable.
Until I came along, we were paying almost 100% of NATO only to get bad trade deals. And now it's been evened out, but very unfair having to do, it was evened out pretty good. Actually, I did a good job. They paid $440 billion if you look at the Secretary General's report, and he was here recently and he said that. He said one of the most amazing things I've ever seen is what President Trump was able to do with these countries of Europe, of which he was in charge of them, but he couldn't get them to pay. I went over, I said, you got to pay, and if you don't pay, we're not going to protect you. It's very simple.
The White House administration intends to put pressure on European NATO allies to increase their defense spending. The New York Post quoted U.S. National Security Advisor Mike Waltz as saying that the U.S. will also spend the same amount.
With the largest conflict since World War II on the horizon, it is time for Europe to demonstrate its commitment to our alliance by increasing spending to at least 5% of GDP. We will continue to have direct and candid conversations to push NATO members to take on their fair share of the burden. Mike Waltz, National Security Advisor to the President of the United States for the New York Post.
Pause. Currently, U.S. spending on NATO is 3.08% of gross domestic product. To reach the 5% threshold, the U.S. would have to commit more than $600 billion in additional funding, writes the New York Post. Lithuania and Estonia have already agreed to increase spending in 2025, Financial Times reported. President of the European Council, Antonio Costa, is confident that all European NATO countries will agree on a decision to increase defense spending at the alliance's June summit in The Hague, reported by Kristina Dombrovska, UATV News.